So we'll start with a wee prayer. Okay, thanks. Yeah, we'll start with a little kind of setting ourselves in the right direction. The Tibetans would say, state our motivation. What's, and that what we really would just simply say, I think, well, state our purpose. Why are we here, And that's a good point. I mean, because the Buddhist view about karma is intention is the main thing. I will, I want, may I. You set yourself in a direction. That seems reasonable, and you know what you're going. So let's think in the most casual way. We're here together to listen. I'm going to be listening too, I promise. You can hear me on Zoom?
Yeah.
And to listen to these words coming from the Buddha, tracking through all these amazing holy beings who've become like the Buddha themselves on the way, taking his methodology of how to turn yourself into a marvelous person. Buddha's view, I think, even just simple terms, Buddha's view about what our potential is pretty exciting, is actually really quite inspiring. That we're not set in stone, that misery and delusions are not our true nature. We can transform ourselves into this marvelous person. So we think we're going to listen to take some advice. This is all advice. And then maybe even 1% of it, great. Use that to help you develop your potential for clarity and wisdom and kindness and less neurosis and less misery and less suffering. And therefore, for you, benefit. And then because we live in this crazy world together, for the sake of those we impact upon, it's very sensible. So thinking in the most simple way, this is why we're sitting here together. And I'll just sing a little prayer in Tibetan. If some of us are already what we call Buddhist, and the first 2 lines refer to us, we can just reiterate our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And the second 2 lines are kind of broadly expressing that goal, that purpose, that motivation that we just said before. Sangye charang soke chognamla jang cho baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chanyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok sangye charang soke chognamla jang cho baru dagni kyap suchi dagi chanyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok sangye charang soke chognamla Jangcho baru dagni kyap suchi, dagi chernyen gi personam ki, drola penchir sangye drupa shok. And because we have this beautiful mandala here, why don't we offer it, just thinking in our minds. The Zopa Noble Park Buddhist group is offering this beautiful mandala, this universe, objects of the universe, to the Buddha. Think like this as a request for the teachings. Saji perki juxing metog tramri rablingji ni de gen padi sange jingdu mikte ulwagi drokonam dag jingla chapasho. We imagine Buddha very happily receives it. Hidam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Okay, so this Lam Rim, this term, if you're a Tibetan, Gelugpa Tibetan Buddhist, is one of the first words you're going to read, And when I first heard it, I didn't know what they were talking about, quite frankly. Lama Zopa just, described all this arcane views. I had no concept of what he was talking about. I kept saying to myself, where's the Buddhism here, I sat there for 1 month, 8 hours a day listening, trying to make sense of it all. So in a simple way, all this packaging, it's a way of packaging Buddha's views. So then we should think, well, what do mean Buddha's views, And this is about an incredibly important point. I remember in New Zealand, I always quote this, in New Zealand years ago, Nelson, which, by the way, is just out of interest, a side point, Kirti Senchab Rinpoche, one of these holy lamas, was asked one day, where's the best place on the planet to meditate? And he said, Nelson, New Zealand. I mean, out of the blue, it's very surprising. Anyway, we were there. There's a centre there. Lama Zopa has a centre there. And I remember this, I had this question that I've never had before or since. It's really fascinating. And I think this is a really crucial point, just to remind us, even if we're Buddhists for 27 years, as it gives us, it reminds us of the way we approach Buddha's teachings, And this man, who happened to be a scientist, he said, who revealed these teachings to the Buddha? Which is an incredibly intelligent question. If you have the view, which the world does, of religion, as far as we're concerned, religion means a creator. Pretty much, you know, the major, certainly the big fat three, you know, like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. So we assume religious philosophy implies, means a creator. So that was what he meant. He assumed Buddhism being religious philosophy, it came from on high. Because think about it, you know. I mean, I was a Catholic and I was very happy being a Catholic. I was in love with God. This is a really important point because it informs the way we approach Buddhism if we choose to be a Buddhist, you know, and it's quite an important point. So I knew what he meant. In other words, Buddhism is from revelation. Christianity, by definition, comes from a creator. It's his views, and then the creator is the boss. The creator made the universe. The creator made the rules. The creator runs the show, and therefore the creator punishes and rewards. This is the broad view we tend to have about religion, isn't it? This is the view, and it's taken as a given. So he assumed it would be the same because it's religion, you know. So I said to him, well, would you ask Einstein, who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? Of course, he laughed. We all laughed because it was like, ha ha, what a joke. Of course, we wouldn't do that. But that's that. Of course, we wouldn't. So why? Because we just know what we mean by scientific is this intelligent person used his intelligence, and then he observed what? He didn't look in the sky. He didn't have a vision. He didn't have a dream. He didn't make it up. He's not speculating. He looked at the world itself. That's what a botanist does. That's what a scientist by definition does. And then he came up with certain findings about what he saw. He then, you know, tested, checked it, codified it as laws, and then he presented his findings. And he said, this is what I have found to be true. Here is my methodology, and you can follow it and you'll get to the same conclusion or not. And if you prove me wrong, I'm happy to hear it. That's exactly what we understand as science. Well, that's exactly Buddha. And so it's hard to hear. Because as soon as we hear that, we think, don't be ridiculous. How can you prove reincarnation? Don't be ridiculous. How can you prove karma, etc.? So there we have an assumption of what the mind is. So the first thing about Buddhism is, and this is the part that's kind of, even if we're Buddhist, we have to keep reminding ourselves because it implies the way we approach. Because if I'm a good Christian, if I'm a proper Catholic, for example, or Christian, I will necessarily follow what God said. I will do his wishes. And in fact, even by definition, a sin in Christianity is doing what God said not to do, going against God's will. It's taken as a given. And so you'd be a good Christian. You'd do God's wishes and God would approve of you. He'd reward you. I'm not being sarcastic. It's just how it is. But that's not Buddha. He's not a creator. He doesn't assert one. His whole philosophical view, it's where he diverged from the Indians, from the Hindus before him, these genius yogis and thinkers and scholars. And as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. I always joke and say, we white people, if we're white people here, European-based, we probably thought it was Mr. Freud 100 years ago who, you know, investigated the self for the first time. No. Anyway. So this person, Buddha, he diverged in his own direction. In particular, he agreed with many similar findings from the Hindus, karma, the nature of consciousness, all of these he agrees with, but it got to the point of what is reality and the source of all this. And the Hindus, even though they have the view of karma, still assert an essence called God, you know, and an essence in here called a soul or a self or something like that, you know. But Buddha diverged separate from that point, directly in relation to his own findings about the nature of self and the nature of the reality of the universe. So basically, Buddha, being a regular person, he was a regular guy who became a Buddha. He was a regular guy who became a superior being, you know. That reminds me too, in Melbourne a couple of years ago, 10 years ago, somebody there who was part of the Melbourne Catholic University went to school with me. I went to Sacré-Cœur, you know, in Burke Road, Glen Iris. And she had been to school there too. So they got me invited to give a little talk, a 20-minute talk at one of their conferences. And I remember I got there that morning and I didn't know what to talk about. I just couldn't think what to talk about. And I looked up the dictionary for the definition of God. And it said 3 essential qualities: infinite wisdom, infinite compassion, infinite power. I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because that's what Buddhism would say, the Mahayana view, that they're the qualities of a Buddha. Now, the radical difference is this. Buddha does not assert a creator. He does not say a person who's achieved those qualities is a creator, because you don't need creating. Buddha's view is we don't need creating. We don't need a boss. We don't need someone to run the show and punish and reward. There is no concept like that in Buddhism. He's a regular guy. And Buddha happens to have found that those three qualities are what each person can achieve, not just one person who runs the show. So it's, in a sense, similar, but radically different. I mean, like radically different. There's no such concept of a creator. There's no such concept of merely revelation and therefore belief, which is how we all, even as Buddhists, think, oh, that's religion. You can't prove it. Therefore, you believe it. The commonest thing we say, oh, do I have to believe in reincarnation? Do I have to believe in karma? You never say, do I have to believe in E equals MC squared? Do I have to believe that 1 + 1 is 2? No, you prove it. But interestingly, until you prove it, it is merely a belief. We all say, oh, it's science. But excuse me, if you haven't proved 1 + 1 is 2, it's not science for you, it's belief. If you haven't proved relativity, it's not science for you, it's belief. Same here, exactly the same. And that's why the Dalai Lama always says to us modern people, if you follow Buddha's methodology, having chosen to do so because you like the idea, but you get to a point where you actually prove from experience that what he says is true isn't, you must reject him. That kind of rigor is a surprise to us from religion because we're very wishy-washy. In fact, we'd almost rather have belief, you know. And we go around shopping and, oh, I like that belief, I won't have that belief. We pop it in our little bag and we say, I'm a Buddhist. I mean, it's just intellectual laziness, not to mention superstition. So this view of the Buddha being a regular person who found from his own experience that this potential to achieve infinite wisdom, compassion, and power, another whole discussion what that means, but simply meaning, you know, that I'm about to say the meaning of the word Buddha, that each person by definition, each being, whether you're a dog, a human, animal, whatever, each person possesses just naturally within their mind this potential. We all possess Buddha nature, they say. It's not like some little Buddha in there kind of has to come out. It's the natural potential of every mind. And another more simple way of putting it, and this is the etymology of the word Buddha, which is so delicious. Buddha implies the utter eradication from this mind of ours, this consciousness, of all neuroses, all fears, all delusions, all constricted, misery, unhappy, demented, developed misery, ego, blah, blah, blah. That for the Buddha, that he has found that all that stuff is not intrinsic to us, is not at the core of our being. So this is like Buddhist psychology, you know, direct experiential findings, incredible. That's an outrageous concept. I go to a therapist or a neuroscientist and say, would you please give me methods to get rid of all ego, all fears, all anger forever? You will think I'm mentally ill, you know, because we get as a given in our world, isn't it? We take it as a given that an ordinary person has some anger, some jealousy, some low self-esteem, some this, some that, right? And then with the other one, so Buddha implies the eradication of that utterly. The second one, da, implies the development to perfection of everything else inside. Compassion, wisdom, kindness. The Buddha, they are at the core of our being. So we think of this in the most simple psychological terms. Whatever level you want to develop these, this is pretty tasty, you know, and this is the essence of being a Buddhist. Strip away all the other stuff, all the 13th century, 15th century robes, bald heads, vows, prostrations, mandalas. This is cultural, but it's got meaning. If it's got no meaning, chuck it out. Culture is just a language, you know, it's not intrinsic. But the fundamentals of it is Buddha's view of the mind. The mind is Buddha's expertise. And every tiny word, every instruction, every phrase, every philosophy, every bit of etymology, every bit of psychology in Buddhism, every bit of it, if there's a tiny fraction of it that doesn't lead you to either lessen neuroses or grow virtue, it is garbage and chuck it in the bin. This is a fact. We have to remember this, but it's hard to, because the packaging, of course, 2,500 years of Buddhism coming from 2,000 years of Hinduism, with cultures coming the way through, it's hard to, it's easy to get caught up in the packaging and forget the essence. I know when I very first heard the teachings from Lama Zopa back in Chen Reisig Institute, completely confused. But when I began to get my head around the concept of what Buddhism thinks of the mind, consciousness, and the concept of karma, that we basically program our own mind. We're not the handiwork of a creator or mummy or daddy. We bring our own mind with us. And that the mind has this fundamental potential or even more simply, the true nature of mind is virtue and goodness and wisdom. That's its nature, conventionally. The other stuff's just garbage added on top, which we can remove. That was, for me, was very revealing. That we're not, in our nature, we're not even human. Forget about not male or female. Forget about transgender, by this or that one, or whatever we might call ourselves, or a tennis player, or a carpenter, or a psychologist. This is how we all try to find our own identity. What am I? We struggle with this mightily. They're fine. They're conventional realities, but they're not our true nature. This is a Buddha's view. Buddha's view, our true nature is existing in our consciousness. And so it was a revelation for me, because I'd been through this intense years, first of a Catholic, then a hippie, then a communist, then a feminist, trying to find a way of defining myself and understanding the world, and then get to the Buddhist view. What defines us is our actual consciousness, our being. That's who we really are, not male, female, or anything else. They're just packaging on top. And what defines our mind is not even the delusions, it's the virtues in us. The wisdom, clarity, kindness, compassion. Buddha has found from his own experience that is who we truly are, and we can perfect that. That's what they mean by Buddha. Okay, it's pretty outrageous when you hear the qualities of a person like that, but just as a concept, it's kind of tasty. It's not religion. Don't call it religion. It's Buddhist psychology. It's Buddha, and it's his own experiential findings. And that's a shocking part. If we think of psychology now, with respect to us and our amazing systems we have in our culture, I think psychology in all the sciences is probably the lowest in the totem pole, because it's not hard. I don't think we respect psychology much. It's very wishy-washy. Why? Because in our culture, we don't trust subjective. We don't trust that. The brain is hard and solid. You can see it. That we like. Neuroscience is one of the top dogs. But for the Buddha, it's the exact opposite. The mind, consciousness. And what this is coming from these Indians. Please, we've got to remember this. It's so astonishing that these genius beings, 3,000 years ago plus. It's only now with the Dalai Lama in town, in the world, that these conversations now that we're even beginning in the West, the modern thinking, to even appreciate this unbelievably sophisticated knowledge coming from these 3,000 years ago, in India. An unbelievable understanding of the mind itself. Not just, we're so used to saying brain when we say mind, we're meaning the subjective, actual cognitive process itself, and where you learn. So all the knowledge in the literature about the mind, which is extensive, both the epistemological model, the way the mind functions, which is so mind-blowing, and then the psychological model. It's incredibly precise, incredibly intricate. And where does this come from? This is what's shocking. We've spelled it out, not from seeing a brain with a microscope, but from having accomplished this genius technique these brilliant Indians invented, called the development of samadhi, this subtle level of concentration at a level of mind beyond the conceptual, beyond the sensory, which is we don't even posit in our culture. A level of mind that is, don't mystify it. We think, oh, that's religion, No, don't mystify it. It's the actual mind, the way these geniuses have discovered it in their own experience, that the subtle level. And you read, especially in Lama Yeshe's books, he tries to encourage us modern people to get a bit excited about our potential, And like in his book on Mahamudra meditation, he describes a few of the qualities that we could develop just getting single point of concentration. Forget realizing emptiness, forget nirvana, forget Buddhahood. It's mind-boggling, not mystical, not hippy-trippy. Clear, precise techniques, and they're living extant right now, being practiced by people like you and me. Unbroken since before the Hindus, the Hindus, they've invented this genius technique that enables you to get the mind to a very subtle level, which you therefore use to observe utterly, completely, and totally and precisely the contents of your mind. And that's at that level we can do the unpacking and unraveling and the radical reconfiguring of this mind of ours into the mind of an ingenious, amazing, holy being full of happiness and joy and bliss and clarity. These are real words of a real process. This is what being a Buddhist means. Not walking around like a stupid looking 14th century. It's cheap. I mean, my robes last me for 5 years and they cost like $10 in Nepal. My head shaved is cheap, it's free. That's what it's all about. But they don't say it like this in literature. I'm talking modern way with an Australian accent, A communist could do this. This is what being a Buddhist is. That's one way of presenting Buddhism. Another way of presenting is Buddhism for sure is a method, is a packaging, is a method of, is a presentation of ethics, an incredibly clear, precise, well-defined system of ethics. Buddhism, second, is a method of stopping unhappiness and getting happiness. Now that sounds inviting. Not sure about the ethics part, but the happiness part sounds good. The third one, which is very abstract, is it's a method of getting rid of ignorance in the mind and getting wisdom. Now that one sounds a bit boring, you know. Oh yeah, and wisdom sounds nice. What's got to do with the price of fish? Well, it all comes down to that one. It all comes down to that one, which is a total surprise. I mean, we admire, in our modern secular culture, we admire intelligent, wise people. You know, but the thing is, and this is the point, you could have the most brilliant physicist, the most brilliant musician, the most brilliant acupuncturist even, you know, a science or an art, highly developed person, but they could still go home and beat up their husband and children because it doesn't help you become less neurotic. It doesn't help you become happy. It doesn't help you practice ethics. For us, ethics is one thing, happiness is another, and wisdom is another. For Buddhism, they utterly are integrated. You cannot have one without the other. So you could argue how to get happy is practice ethics. You could say that. You could argue how to get happy is to know your mind and get rid of the rubbish. Equally, exactly the same. And you could say, finally, how to get happy, finally, is how to get in touch with how things exist. Because what Buddha's saying is why we're unhappy and why we cause harm, which is why we have bad ethics, is because we are not in touch with reality. So it comes down to the mind, comes down to the mind. So there's different levels of reality as far as the Buddha is concerned, you know. So one way of saying what the Lam Rim is a presentation of the different levels of how, as from the Buddhist perspective, how things exist. So it's presented, as all Buddhist views, presented in a nice orderly way, according to the capacity of a disciple. So the very first level, the very first teaching you hear practically is that Buddha's view about how things are impermanent, with extensive teachings on impermanence. There's subtle impermanence, gross impermanence, blah, 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 you know. We go, yeah, that's interesting. We all know things change, but it's extensive. So now why is he telling us this? We've got to ask, I wonder why he's telling us that things are impermanent. Well, it has to be assumed, or he's telling us, well, actually, you know, because we're not in touch with impermanence, we think the exact opposite. And even he's arguing with one of the previous views, a philosophical view that certain elements like a creator and a soul or an Atman are permanent, are unchanging, don't have a cause. There's a whole philosophical view. So this is the very first presentation at a conventional level of how that's not true. And he presents his findings, how things in fact are impermanent. You will not find a permanent, uncaused, intrinsic self or indeed creator. You know? But impermanence at a simplest level, he's saying at the simplest level, one of our major misconceptions, which is the cause of suffering, is that we think, we believe, we desperately want things. We believe things are permanent. We believe, no, don't necessarily want, we believe things are set in stone. That's why I always quote, like I shouldn't always say her name as if I'm criticizing her, but it was such a nice, I read a story years ago in Vanity Fair, an interview with Nicole Kidman when she was married to Tom Cruise. And there's just such a good example. And she said, because they talked about their lives, how they were happy and everything was amazing and their wonderful life and everything's going beautifully, which means in Buddhist perspective, attachment's getting what it wants, which is wonderful when things are going well, how marvelous. And she said, we will be together until we're 18. So analyze that. That means because when things are going well, we all know that when things are going well, your health is good, your job is good, the hubby's behaving nicely, the kids are happy, the weather's good. It's sort of, we're all buoyed up. And that means attachment's getting what it wants. And we're going to discuss this. And then because it's so delicious and and we can't bear, it's in the back, we can't bear the thought that it will change. So she said, we will be together until we are 80. What she meant was it was so delicious, everything was so beautiful, and we can't bear the thought it'll change. Let's hope and pray and cross our fingers, and I desperately want it to last until we're 80. But we're so grasping, we are all like this. If it's pleasant, we desperately want it to last. So we actually believe it will last. We all say that. Finally, I found happiness. Instantaneously attachment gets what it wants. We then plonk this permanence onto it because we can't bear the thought. That's why we have so much anxiety. We can't bear the thought that that nice thing might change. That's grasping at permanence. Deep mistake in the mind, primordial instinctive mistake in the mind. So one mistake is attachment that exaggerates the deliciousness of things. That's an emotional affliction we all know about, but it's got this one crucial quality of its being a misconception, a wrong view, a misconception about the delicious person and the relationship. Attachment makes it look divine, and then permanence on top of it then wants it to last forever. So these are two mistakes right there, two conceptual mistakes, conceptual stories in the mind that we have made up. And this is Buddha's point. Things aren't like that, he said. Things aren't permanent. And then also what the picture that attachment paints of the relationship is also not true. It's an exaggeration. The key way the emotional misconceptions, the emotional afflictions, the delusions are liars, are misconceptions, is that they exaggerate. So attachment exaggerated the deliciousness of this happy, wonderful relationship. And then permanent, and then you can't bear the thought of changing. So then another lie is plonked on top. So these are both misconceptions. So they're views in the mind we practice for countless lives, he says, that we plonk on top of reality. And Buddha says, this is why we suffer. This is very surprising to us. This is why we suffer. There's a disconnect between what we think and how things appear to us and how things are. That is the exact reason for the Buddha. So one from beginning impermanence all the way through to the impermanence and the view of karma. So impermanence, sorry guys, things aren't permanent. Then he tells us about karma, the massive one. Karma, the law of karma for the Buddha is his view, his observation that it's the natural law that runs the universe. It's the law of cause and effect, such that everything any being thinks and says and does, every millisecond of any being thinks and saying and doing is the very process that produces that person and their experiences from life to life to life to life. We don't need a creator. We don't need someone running the show. We don't need punishers and we don't need rewarders, which is the view we all have. We don't need that. It's a misconception, Buddha says. We run ourselves. Big surprise. Now that is a massive mistake we make. If you're not a Christian or a Muslim who thinks God runs the show, you think your mummy and daddy run the show, or the external world runs the show, all these conspiracy theories you make up every day, you know. We think the external world is why I'm happy and suffering. We think our mother and father made us. They gave us a brain, they gave us DNA, they gave us genes. They didn't give us a mind, Buddha says. Then another mistake, he tells us about the mind now. And he says, it's not your brain. It doesn't come from your mummy and father. It doesn't start in the womb. It's a beginningless and endless continuity of mental moments that's run by this law of karma. He says this is his observation. He's not asking you to believe it. It's just like Einstein's not asking us to believe it in E equals mc squared. He says, this is my findings. Okay, they don't talk like this in the Buddhist literature. This is the meaning. He might be wrong. We were big boys and girls. We can open our mind to the possibility. It's up to us to prove it now, not to swallow it whole. He says our mind is not physical. It is not a handiwork of a creator. It's not the handiwork of mummy and daddy. The brain is a physical indicator, you could argue that, of what goes on in the mind. So are the genes and the DNA. Nothing wrong. But they're not the mind itself. This is fundamental to Buddhism. So we can prove, even just here, that karma and the mind not being physical are not true. Then the whole of Buddhism would collapse into a heap of incoherent nonsense. Then we get to, within the mind, we get to then understanding the neurotic states of mind and the virtuous states of mind. This is fundamental. If at the end Bud implies ridding the mind of all the rubbish, and then da implies developing to perfection all the goodness, it implies already, it tells us exactly that in the mind there must be neurotic states of mind and virtuous ones. So surely then this is our job, and you see it repeatedly in the teachings, what to be practiced and what to be abandoned. Continuously the teachings say that. So we have to abandon, if we want to get to Buddha, abandon neuroses, abandon delusions. Why? Because they cause you suffering, sweetheart. Not because you're a naughty girl and get punished. So for our own benefit, and we have to practice the virtues. It's just that's what the process is, you know. It's very practical. So to learn to know the mind and the content. So that's the second part of the Lam Rim. The first part is control the servants of the mind. Given that we're driven by delusions right now, mainly attachment, Buddha says, according to the Four Noble Truths, effectively it's the main cause of suffering. First of all, you don't even worry about the attachment part. You simply control the servants of attachment. You control your body, you control your speech. And this is the other point that's huge to remember where this information comes from. Again, that business, I asked about the creator concept. I remember, I always quote this too. I have a Jesuit priest friend, and I asked him, well, what is a sin by definition? What makes something wrong? A sin, a negative action, you know? He said, by definition, a sin is doing what God said not to do. And that's totally reasonable if there's a creator who is the boss, who runs the show, and who punishes and rewards. Totally appropriate. Well, for the Buddha, that's like going to your doctor and she says, don't smoke. And you say, why not? She says, because I say so. And if you do, I'll give you cancer. That's, for the Buddha, that's like that. It's absurd. He's not being rude. He says, so then this is the point. Buddha has got his list of 10 don'ts, so does Jesus, right? It's very similar. So you ask Jesus, why should I not kill? Because God said. That's what the priest said. I'm not criticizing. If you live your life according to this, you'll be a very happy person. Remember Lama Yeshe saying that if we lived our lives like devoted Muslims, we'd all be Buddha by now, you know? Such faith. So the difference here is so radical, you can't believe it. You don't kill if you're a Christian because God said, and that's what makes you, and nothing complaining about that. The priest said there's some aspect of natural law, meaning people don't like getting killed, but that's the only reason for the Buddha. That's the main logic for why killing is wrong. It's a natural law. People don't like getting killed. That's what makes killing a negative action. Very interesting, the difference. That's like cancer. Why? Because smoking, don't smoke, Robina, because it causes you cancer. So your doctor's a wise person who advises you based on her experience that will harm you, Robina. And this is the point for the Buddha. And we miss this, I tell you, among even Western Buddhists, we miss this point completely. So killing for the Buddha and killing like in his list of 10 don'ts, don't kill, don't steal, don't jump on the wrong partner, you know, various ones of speech, practical advice, particularly the actions that harm others, they're the most heavy ones. And he exhorts us not to do them because there's two things now. One is killing is wrong because it harms others. But this is the point we had to get. He exhorts us not to do it right at the beginning stage of practice. Because he's saying, remember, every millisecond of what we think and do and say is the process that produces me. So then we can see if I do kill, why would I kill? It's driven by the motivation. Well, you don't kill out of compassion. Usually you can do sometimes with your pet and things, or maybe your hubby. You know, I mean, these days everyone's killing everybody because we think it's now a good thing. Never, whole discussion new. Never mind that. But usually when we kill, steal, lie, it's coming from attachment and anger. It's pretty obvious. So therefore, when we kill, steal, lie, jump on the wrong partner, that action, because it's driven by a neurosis, because it's driven by delusions, harms me. So the very first level of practice, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, etc. Because you know why, Robina? Because those actions harm others, and then because they're heavier, because they harm others, and because they're driven by delusions, they will poison your mind, sweetheart. And they will manifest as a future rebirth, a tendency to keep doing it, having the thing happen to you, and an environmental result. There are 4 ways our actions ripen. It seems a bit abstract for us, but this is the Buddha's observation. So for our own benefit, we are the beneficiaries of the first level of practice. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. This is self-compassion. We can't hear it that way. We just hear it as punitive. Oh, I'm a naughty girl, I'll get punished. No, it's infantile. No one's punishing. We punish ourselves. So this is Buddha's observation of what's real. Then the next level, second one, like I said, you get to the mind, get to the actual root of the problem. And then you dig deep into the psychological model and you observe and begin to distinguish between the neuroses and the virtues. This is a tremendously powerful job. And this is the very essence of being a Buddhist. As Lama Yeshe says, when you start this is when you become a Buddhist, and that's being your own therapist. Learning to distinguish between the neurotic, I-based, fear-based, distorted, delusional, exaggerated, painful states of mind that misrepresent reality to us and cause us pain. And then the virtues that are valid, reasonable, connected to others, based on interdependence, and are valid insofar as they are real, are valid depictions of valid reality. That's Buddha's point. It's not a moralistic one, bad and good. Delusions are neurotic because they're not in touch with reality. They misrepresent reality to us. So attachment makes the cake look more delicious than it is. Anger makes the ex-boyfriend look more ugly than he really is. And these are the two we swing between 1,000 times a day. And these are the basis of the other 83,998 neurotic states of mind that Buddha always talks about. Attachment and aversion, such cute words. If we can begin to understand attachment and aversion, we will have a profound view of our own mind, I promise, and then in other people's. This is Buddha's view. Not how we think in modern psychology at all. The key functions of these neuroses, one, and this is indicated by the terms, disturbing emotion. This is the very first level in the Lam Rim. The explicit teaching is get to see how attachment and anger and jealousy, etc., cause you so much pain. It's compassion for yourself. But the deeper meaning, which is implicit at that point, is indicated by the other term. It is just perfect in English. Lama Yeshe would use this one. The first term is implied by the first painful part of these neuroses is implied by the word afflictions, which is straight from the Sanskrit and the Tibetan. But we don't use that word in our culture. It's very old-fashioned. Oh, you go to your therapist. Oh, I have an affliction. Can you speak English, please? You know. Well, what kind of affliction Buddha's talking about? Guess what? Mental afflictions. And what's a mental affliction? What's another word for affliction? Listen to this. It's shocking. Illness. What kind of illness? Mental. Attachment for the Buddha is the main mental illness. This is hilarious for us, speaking this way. This is exactly, he would have loved that term, mental illness. He calls them mental afflictions. They cause you pain. Why? Because they're misconceptions. As Lama Zopa says, all the delusions decorate on top of what is there layers upon layers of characteristics that just aren't there. So that means when with the lenses, with your attachment glasses on, the cake appears to you as more delicious than it really is. And we believe in what we see. And this is what keeps us paralyzed in samsara. As Lama Zopa says, bad enough that attachment misrepresents the cake back to you. The killer is we believe that assessment. This is what keeps us paralyzed in suffering. And then after 4 pieces, it'll now look disgusting. And now we believe the cake itself has got disgustingness in it, as if somehow between the first mouthful and the 5th, someone snuck in some disgustingness. Because it's got nothing to do with our mind. It's all the cake, isn't it? This is the dementia the Buddha will talk about as the mental illness that causes so much suffering. So the second level of Lam Rim, you get deep into this. You get your hands in your own shit, as a friend of mine said, a therapist. As I would say, you start to taste your own vomit. That's when you really become your own therapist. You dig deep into your mind using Buddha's analysis. You can use the West. That's okay. Got good analyses, HDAD and ADOD and OCD and bipolar and all these Greek words, always Greek words. You can use all that, but this is very much, I mean, it's very precise. And they're indicating very exact conceptual stories. Well, there's billions of conceptual stories in there that have this emotional component. But our tragedy in the West is we don't notice what's happening in the mind until it hits our body, until we have a physical feeling. And the Buddha's brilliant skill by giving us simple meditation techniques based on samadhi is to begin to notice what's happening in the mind, in the conceptual stories, before it vomits to the surface as intense emotion. That's it. Our trouble in the West is we don't notice what's happening in our mind until it becomes emotional. So we, I'm about to kill my husband. What'll I do? Well, that's like saying my wheels have just fallen off. What'll I do at 150 kilometers an hour? It's a bit late. If you'd had a mechanic and noticed the wheels wobbling, you would never have your wheels falling off. Well, we notice emotionally only when the wheels fall off, because we don't have techniques to notice what's happening first, which is why the West is now loving the Buddha's techniques of so-called mindfulness and even the 57 varieties. We begin to notice our mind first before it vomits out the mouth, or before you are inert in bed with depression and you can't move. Oh, I must be depressed, because we don't pay attention to the tiny thoughts from the second we wake up. We wait for the physical emotion. And it's just too late. This is Buddha's. You forget a nirvana, emptiness, and Buddhahood. Just that alone is the most brilliant skill to help us keep sane. Because once you get the thoughts before they start becoming powerful, emotions, you can reconfigure them because they're all conceptual stories. And that's a big surprise. And we realize anger, jealousy, pride, low self-esteem, which are powerful emotional feelings, are rooted in being conceptual stories, and they are misconceptions. They're all based on the root misconception of a concrete, solid, inherent, intrinsic, separate me. And there's layers of misconceptions upon each other. So we have to unpack those misconceptions, unpack and unravel them. That's what the work is. Radically reconfiguring our conceptual stories. That's how we change our mind. To the next level, having done a lot of this one, becoming a marvelous person already, we now go to the compassion wing. A bird needs two wings, wisdom and compassion. This is the wisdom wing. You are the beneficiary of that. You are the beneficiary of this, of reconfiguring your mind to be in sync with these views. Buddha's views, yeah, but you're buying into them until you find them to be true. If you find them wrong, then you say, thanks, Buddha, goodbye. Now we get to the compassion one. Here, if you stopped here, you'd achieve your own nirvana. Goodbye, I'm out of here. You don't come back. But you're on the compassion wing, so you continue to now work on your mind. You never stop. But now the shift is to what's most beneficial for others. You're now learning to continue to break down the barriers that the ego grasping has created between self and other, total fantasy division, So we move now towards thinking of others first, putting others first. It's a powerful series of steps that you go until it culminates in this outrageous paradigm shift in the mind called bodhicitta. It seems like demented in our culture, so advanced. We're no longer the thought of I, only others. It's almost hard to imagine. We don't posit such a possibility in our culture. Then you finish your work with the 6 perfections. You plod life after life, now perfecting the compassion wing by bopping along, practicing generosity, patience, perseverance, and whatever one, morality. And then the last, in relation to sentient beings, and then on your cushion, you perfect the last 2, concentration and wisdom. And then that's Buddhahood. It's a logical, progressive steps, one step at a time, many lifetimes. So that's the essence. Where's my glasses? And you better ask me some questions before we have vegan scones and vegan cream. 10 o'clock. Okay. Ask me some questions now. Any questions? Yes, please.
Dear Robina, thank you so much.
Okay, darling. Okay.
Wonderful. I've got about 8 questions, so I'm not going to dominate the whole.
Don't worry. They're probably ones we all have.
I've got 2 that I have to ask.
Go on.
First one is, I live in a bushfire district, and I was with some friends that have built a new house. And they were saying how radical and random the fires were.
That's right. Terrible.
Yeah, and how random.
That's right. Of course, it appears random, doesn't it?
Random.
Exactly,
Yeah.
darling.
And she said, well, that's why I don't.
I see. That's right. I understand that.
To take karma person.
I understand. So if we're taking the Buddhist analysis of that conversation, no judgment of the person or you, we have to assume there's a certain view in her mind, isn't there? And the view is that suffering happens unfairly. That's a very deep view. We all have it. That's the very nature of ego. As soon as even the smallest person, even as small as the smallest thing that happens to us that comes out of the blue, which, if you put it this way, is what attachment doesn't want, like stubbing your toe, like the red light. Forget your house burning down. The first instinct is, how dare that happen, isn't it? We feel it. So in the Buddha's analysis is from many lifetimes of powerful practice, we have believed totally in the innocent victim concept of an I, which has attachment that only wants the nice things. And when we get the nice things, we assume it's our right. So just give me more, please. We don't think there's a cause of them. We don't think we created them. We just think they're gifts from the outside world. And I like gifts, so give me more. And then when the bad thing happens, we are equally outraged because we don't deserve bad things. So all of this is based on attachment and aversion. Attachment is an assumption that only good things should happen. And aversion is the outrage when the bad thing happens. So it's all based on this view of a separate, independent self that got made by God or some other person out there who plonked us uninvited onto this planet, not consulting me about it. And so I'm this innocent victim. That's my words of the analysis of what we think reality is. So of course you're going to respond like that. I'm just telling you this. I'm just talking this way. Do you see my point? Now, but the other interesting point is that most of us only think of karma when it comes to the bad things. So that person, or any of us, we might have a bad thing happen, but in between there are 47 good things either side of it. Like the cake tasted nice and you're feeling healthy this minute. Every second you're feeling even nice things. Each one of those is a fruit of your virtue, but we never think of the virtues. I've never yet had a person ever in all my years ask the question, why do good things happen? It's only the bad, which implies we have this deep grasping belief that I only deserve good things. But it's all completely irrational, Buddha says, made up and emotional and neurotic. So it's quite a while to unpack it. Even for Buddhists, we don't unpack it that much. Do you understand?
And that's how we take it personally.
What?
So that we take it personally because.
But I mean, it is personal, darling.
Yeah.
No, it is personal. Karma's totally personal. Of course it's personal. It is personal, sweetheart. There's a very detailed analysis. This is like, I know it sounds peculiar talking this way, but the way the Buddhist approach is that the rigor and analysis and logic we use to understand mathematics is the same when it comes to understanding the law of karma. It's not some mystical thing wielded by God and you're punished and rewarded, which is how we think it means. And therefore it's unfair. It's logical. Like, you know, the law of karma is the law of botany. Everything that's growing in that garden, you know, and this is an interesting point. It is personal by definition. If you have a garden, you know it's called your garden. You say it's my garden, don't you? And you walk out in the garden, you see weeds and you see flowers. You would never say, who put weeds in my garden? You wouldn't say that, would you? Why? Why? Simply speaking, why? That it's your garden. Yeah. But we don't think our life is our life. We think someone gave it to us. So we think someone gives us bad and gives us good. We love the good, give me more. Don't care what causes it. But how dare you give me bad? This is quite a demented view, deep in our bones. But analysing it this way takes time. It's an assumption deep in our bones and it's hard to get to it. You see my point? Yeah. If you look in your bank, you would never say, why are there no dollars in my bank? You know what's in the bank is what you put there. So these are such a good example. Our life, Buddha says, is our life. It is our garden. So literally every tiny thing we meet and hear and see and taste and touch, we planted it. Every second of the day, all the good things. Most of us in this room should be blissed out like we've run $100 million in the lottery because our life is like a miracle. We're the 1% of this planet who have a reasonable life and a house and home and some sanity and some money in the bank and some friends. We don't ever pay attention. We only pay attention when the bad thing happens. We just greedily grasp at all the flowers, eat them all, eat up. It's like you've got a garden. You don't know you grew them, you forget. And you see all the veggies, you go, oh, aren't I lucky? You shove the veggies in, but you forget to grow more. You'd never do that. So the botany is such a good example. But it takes a while to say all this. So then, you know, now well, the biggest learning from that is you've got to say karma in a particular way to people. But not when they're suffering, that's the trouble. Yeah. Because she just assumes it's punishment. It's another variation of punishment. And of course, it sounds so heavy, but it's hard to unpack the layers of assumptions in those simple statements. Do you see my point? Yeah. Okay, so next time, just have sympathy. Yes. And say, I'm so sorry. Yes. You understand? Yeah. What's your next question? Or somebody else got a question? Yes, go, sweetheart. You next. Yes, thank you.
When the question's been asked,
yes,
use the mic to ask the question so that people on Zoom can.
Oh, they can't hear you. Did you hear her talk? Did you hear her question, you people? A little bit, sort of, roughly. Yeah. So you want me to repeat it? Yeah. You want me to repeat the question? Okay, what's the next question? You go, darling, yeah.
When I observe my mind and
when she examines her mind, I'm going to repeat for these people.
Oh, yes. Courageous.
Yeah.
To admit it to myself.
And she's being courageous to admit to herself what?
I can see
that particular thought maybe, oh, this is actually ill will, not
This is-
like I want to kill you.
Oh, this is
but
actually ill will, a bit
and
annoyed and
it's-
upset with somebody,
I'm jealous.
or she's jealous. Yeah, good. So what's the question?
The question is, in that moment.
Yeah, in that moment when she sees it. Yes.
What do I do?
Okay, good. Very good question. If when you're playing to learn to play piano, and at that moment you notice you played the wrong note, what would you do? What would you do if you notice you played the wrong note? It's very simple. What?
I would play it right.
Yeah, but how'd you learn to know the right? You have to learn the theories of music, won't you? Same here. We're learning Buddhist psychology here. We're taking on board Buddha's psychology. So you know what a virtue is and you know what a delusion is. You have to know them. You have to learn them and then know them. So when you hear a delusion, you counteract it with the opposite. Just like you would playing piano. You argue with it. It's a concept. It's a viewpoint. It's a concept, darling. But why it comes quickly is because it's a habit. So then you analyze what jealousy is. Jealousy is based on anger. How dare that person be happy? How dare... So you hear it, you conceptualize it. It is a concept, but it comes quickly as a feeling. So you make it a thought. And then you argue with that thought. So if it's attachment and it sees a cake, and you exaggerate its deliciousness and you're grasping at it. Come on, girl, give it a break. The cake doesn't really exist like that. It's just my fantasy. If a person annoys you, you go down for breakfast and your hubby's slurping his coffee yet again, an annoyance, like you said, ill will, not even anger much, arises. It means you're just, and when you know that anger is a response when your attachment doesn't get what it wants, you want a nice sound because you don't want slurping. You don't want to stub your toe. You don't want a red light. Attachment only wants nice things. So when you know that and you feel the annoyance arising, then you can grab it. And before you vert out the mouth, you say, give him a break. It's just a slurp. I can call it something different. He's allowed to slurp his coffee. You practice compassion, or you think, it's just an exaggeration and you argue with it. You simply be your own therapist. You talk yourself through it. We do this all the time. You see my point? It's very simple. You've got to catch it before it comes out the mouth. You get my point?
No, it's not like, it's like
But
I'm thinking something.
That's right.
And then I realize in
I know.
conventional reality, it can be a normal thought. And I'm like, no.
Okay, but are you
This is
hearing what I just
actually-
answered?
Yes,
Do you hear it?
I'm thinking, oh my God, this is actually.
I know, but do you hear my answer? Do you hear my
deeper,
do you hear my solution?
Yeah, to think to like a virtue.
What?
Think about. So there are 10 non-virtues, and then.
Well, the
think
10 is an
it's
example of a
like-
little list, yeah. But there's millions of others.
Mm.
You just have to hear it and then you catch it, and it's a thought. I mean, you do this all the time. You're annoyed with your sister and you just say, oh, shut up, it's okay, let her be. You just did the job. You just counteract with kindness. It's like that. But the more you know botany, the more you can recognize the wrong things. If you don't know botany very well, you can only do so much. Same with the mind. So you've got to know your mind well. And we're using Buddha's analysis here. The more you know that, the more you can see it. What, darling? What?
I think what you said, I'm thinking now, like I know that I can recognize, the non-virtues.
She's saying she can recognize the 10 non-virtues in her mind then.
But yeah, to go to the positive.
But the 10
side,
non-virtues,
to
darling,
become-
no, but they're not the mind. They're actions. They're different. They're driven by delusions. So killing is driven by anger or attachment. Lying is driven by, they're the actions of the body and speech. That's the very first level. That's not even about the mind yet. But this is the first level of practice. Control the servants of your mind. Control the body and control the speech. That's your first level. Then when you can harness the verbal and physical energy more, also by living in vows, then you get to the mind. That's more subtle. And you see the anger that drives it, the jealousy that drives it, the attachment that drives it. Do you see my point?
Yes.
She understands. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Venerable
Okay,
Robina. Could I ask you about being wrathful? Because I get the.
You mean getting angry? It's a simple word. It's a fancy word for angry.
So I get the accept or change.
You get the what?
Accept.
Accepting change.
Yeah, like you in another teaching, you had your alcoholic friend, and she said, the husband, either I accept this or I change it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
So
exactly.
I
Go
took
on.
that and I
Good.
go,
Yep.
right, I don't like this. Accept it.
Or change it. That's it. Or get it. Or get out.
And then I go, also, why is this happening? Why didn't I get this job?
Yeah, then you
Not
apply the
today.
view of karma
Not
or whatever.
now. Karma.
Okay,
all
so
that
what's the
stuff.
question?
So now, for myself, I've got that. But with others, I see they're doing something else of attachment. I work in safety.
Okay, so give an example of a scenario.
All right. The other day, somebody
Somebody the other day
was driving a forklift too
driving
fast
a forklift too fast.
because we're under extremely
Okay, pressure, yeah,
to
right,
work.
yeah,
But his attachment was driving him. I've got to get the job done.
that's
Because
right.
that's my job. That's all I care about.
And he got angry easily when
Well, I
things
didn't get
went.
angry, but
He got angry when things went wrong, is what you're saying.
I'm looking at him and I see when people sort of out of total disregard for other people,
Yeah,
right? They're just literally their attachment.
right.
Driving.
Go on then.
I get frustration or
Okay,
I
so the
think-
question is,
I think, okay, well, no, I've got to be tolerant or
that's
whatever.
right. But what's the
But
question?
Well, at some point you need to.
Okay,
speak up,
okay.
you
So
know.
basically what
So
you're
when do
saying
I
is,
get angry
okay,
or when do
okay.
I just get like
okay,
driven over?
basically
You know?
what you're saying is, what he's saying is a good point, that, and this is all based on you having some awareness of your own mind, and you know about attachment and anger, and then you see other people, and let's say it's your job. It's not as if you're some stranger who walks in and starts bossing someone around. It's your job,
Yeah.
right? You supervise these people, and that's
Yeah,
they're
I'm a
your
manager.
okay. So that's an important point to put. So it's your job to make sure they do the right job, and also if it's coming from kindness and wisdom, that does help. So you can see their mind getting out of control, and if they're not responding to your gentle approaches, and it all depends. If you want the result, you have to trust the level you can get angry. You have to trust the level at which you can shout. If they love you and respect you, you know you can get away with so much. But if that, you can be as wise as possible, but if you might raise your voice and it's not appropriate, they won't listen to you. So you've got to have the wisdom to know that the approach that you take of raising your voice will be beneficial for them. Then it'll bring the result. If you just be wrathful, and you might be right,
Yeah.
but if they don't listen, what's the point? You've just
Because
missed
I
the whole
think that
opportunity.
the deities that are ruffled, but they're doing it out of compassion.
Well, that's the whole point.
because
It's like
yeah,
tough. It's called tough love,
Yeah.
and you've got to be confident that it's not coming from you. We can pretend it's not angry, but if you lie, you're lying to yourself and you're harming them. It's got to come from a genuine wish for their benefit and for the benefit of the big picture. It's got to come from that. And if you have confidence in that, you'll be able to do it. But if they don't listen, what's the point?
Yeah.
If you just alienate them, what's the point? No benefit. So it's got to come from the right place. Do you understand?
Yeah,
and it's got to be wise. They've got to listen.
Yeah.
If they don't listen, you could be the best saint on the planet. If they don't listen, what's the point?
Yeah.
So you have a lot of wisdom
Fine line.
involved.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
So be brave.
Yeah.
And then take the consequences.
Thanks.
Somebody else on Zoom or someone else? Yes. Talk to me.
On the same note here.
Good, yeah.
What if you're not confident if things are going to go?
Well, if you're not confident, it'll come out all muddled, I think. You get all nervous and it'll be all wrong. And they'll dump on you.
Confident that it will benefit. It could be a 50-50.
Well, I mean, no, okay. I mean, you've got to take risks sometimes. And often when it comes from sincerity, I mean, yeah. I mean, we were talking about Mr. Trump this morning. You've got to admire certain things about Mr. Trump. He actually has got some, for whatever reason, we can talk what you like about karma, but he really has, he says what he wants, and people absolutely adore that quality. So there's something interesting about that. Whereas people are so concerned about what you people think and they're all political, people can't stand that, you know. So if you're a very sincere person and the people know that you like them, then I think it's going to work, you know. Do you understand? And you've got to learn from it. Be brave, learn from it. You're not going to be perfect every time. But you've got to, if you really mean well, you'll persevere with that person, you know, and they'll know that you mean well. I think so. I think so. You know, don't be afraid. We're very afraid because and this is what comes actually as incidentally, this is the major attachment we all have, is attachment to being seen as a good boy. So what holds most of us back and even saying anything is we're scared. We think it's being scared of upsetting someone. No, it's scared they won't like us. Because we're mostly, our biggest attachment is what people think of us. Do you understand? And that's what makes everything we do. That's why every politician is hated, because they're so phony. They're trying to creep and crawl to make you like them. Whereas Mr. Trump couldn't care less. Everybody adores him. It's so ironic, you know. I mean, his karma will end at some point. They'll all hate him. But meanwhile, he's getting away with it. It's incredible. We're going to be brave, though. Someone else? Yes. And just before you say more, anybody on Zoom has got a question. If not, it's okay. You don't have to have. No worries. You go.
My question's to do with euthanasia. Basically, the question is, why is it best not to do euthanasia? And I'll give you an example.
Never mind. Don't give an example. I'll just talk. I'll answer the question. It's easy.
Okay.
It's all a question of wisdom. Okay, as the Dalai Lama says, compassion is not enough. You need wisdom. Lama Zopa says meaning well is not enough. So if I've got a headache and you've got compassion, this is amazing, right? But what if you don't have any wisdom and you can't distinguish between a bloody cyanide pill and an aspirin? You might mean well. Meanwhile, I die an agonizing death. Oh, I meant well, Robina. Well, thanks a lot. Keep your pills to yourself. You wouldn't do that action until you were certain, would you, that the pill would be effective. Are you agreeing with that concept? Just that one alone, can you hear it? You look doubtful.
Yeah.
Don't put it to the death one. Hear my point. Can you hear that you would never do that? You're not understanding me, are you? You don't get what I'm saying.
Are you saying you have to do the appropriate medication?
No, I didn't say that. I'm saying you would never give a pill to somebody if you didn't know with confidence it was the right pill. If you had, can't you hear my point? You could have compassion for me. Oh my God, Robina, I'm so sorry you are suffering. I must want to help you. You have compassion, right? This is perfect, yeah? But what good is your compassion if you give me the wrong pill? So you've got to have wisdom as well as compassion. Can you hear that concept?
Yeah.
Thank you. So now, killing somebody, whether it's your grandma or your dog, means to be effective for that person, which is why you're doing it. You're doing it for their sake, right? That's compassion. But the wisdom we need for it to be effective is that you have to have clairvoyance that sees their mind, and you know exactly at the time you kill them will be the perfect timing for a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered, such that when they die, they'll get a nice human rebirth and carry on practicing their Buddhist Dharma and meet the Dalai Lama. If you've got that wisdom, kill me right now. I'm happy. Who has that wisdom? That's exactly right. So don't play Russian roulette with your grandma or your dog. It's very rude. That's the point behind it. But we will all say, oh, but my dog is suffering. Don't we say that? Yes, it is suffering. Yes, it is suffering. But the Buddhist view would be, and of course this is hard because we don't posit future lives, you know, it's too abstract for us. I'm just giving you the Buddhist analysis. So the Buddhist view would be, at the time of death, and it's very detailed in the descriptions of the process. It's about before you start breathing, after the process starts, about 2 hours before you stop breathing. At some point in that process, the karmic seed that person has created, they're carrying around their bank vault of billions of karmic seeds. The karmic seed that will determine the next life will be triggered. And if their mind is freaking out at that point, it will trigger a negative seed, which means they're programmed to take a suffering rebirth, like another animal or a spirit realm or another kind of rebirth. I'm just giving you the Buddhist analysis. And if the mind is virtuous and it triggers a virtuous karmic seed, then it'll give them a future human rebirth. Now, we can't be certain about that. You can do your best. So the Buddhist approach would always be do everything you can to help the person be peaceful, let them hear mantras. You know, you play mantras, give them painkillers if you like. And as Lama Zopa says, every second, especially if it's a human, every second of that human, that experience can only be virtuous. And then when their mind is more peaceful and they will die. So you allow their own karma to take care. You intervene to the degree that you can help them be peaceful and virtuous, and you hold their hand metaphorically, and you play mantras, which immediately for animals too, immediately makes them peaceful. It's a miracle what mantras can do. Then that can help them die peacefully, which helps a virtuous karmic seed be triggered, which will help them get a decent human rebirth. That's the thinking behind it.
Yes, I agree with that.
Oh, well,
And
what's
that's
the
what
question then?
That's what I did for my job.
Okay, so what's the question?
So, but you answered me before, but there's still no guarantee.
Of course, there's no guarantee because you can't control a person's karma, but you can do whatever you can to help them.
But if my action was to give euthanasia to put them in a peaceful state.
No, you can't do that. There's no such thing as a peaceful state. We say, oh, look at her, she's so peaceful. I'm sorry, that's total rubbish. Medication medicates the body, not the mind.
Yes.
The mind is its own character and needs to have virtuous sounds and virtuous prayers and a person being calm and kind to make them as virtuous as possible. But you've got to ask yourself why you want to kill them. Why do you want to cut their life short for when you can help them die peacefully? Why do you want to do that? That's what euthanasia is.
Well, that's what I want to really point out, because I wanted this dog to have its own dignity of death.
Good, and you did it beautifully then.
Well, if it was my mother, I would have given my mother some pain relief if she's struggling and gasping for breath and drowning in her own blood.
I understand that.
Which is drowning her lungs. So this dog is drowning in their
So
own
then
blood.
go back to the question again then.
So
The question is,
So I give euthanasia, but
just a minute, darling, can we just keep it simple? You kill your mother. Can we use real words so we can
okay,
just keep
so
it?
if I kill my, there's. I had
So,
to-
but what's the question?
You cannot give a dog pain relief at that stage because if they give them.
Sweetheart, I have to,
pain relief, they
I
die.
beg you, I've got to cut through and be rude. I want to know the clear question. There's a lot of stuff there. I understand, but ask a question. What's the question?
Well, I've just. killed
No,
the
darling,
dog.
what's the
The
question?
question is, I've just killed the dog, so I'm going to get the bad karma. of that,
No,
and that
darling,
dog's
don't
going to
talk
go
like that. It's
forever.
infantile. Don't be that way. It's not nothing to do with the reality.
The
It's not.
question then is, why is it bad to give euthanasia?
I
if
just
you cannot
explained it.
see it?
I
You
explained
cannot see
really
it.
clearly why, but you couldn't hear it, darling. So I can say it again for you, but try and. It's a practical issue, not an emotional one, not a moralistic one, not a punitive one, which is how you're hearing it. Your answer showed that's how you're hearing it. So I tried to use the example of the pill, but you just didn't hear it. So I'll say it again. Do you accept in general? Okay. That's very interesting, isn't it? So I understand. In general, first of all, okay, another way of putting the whole thing. There's two people involved. There's a dog and there's you. Two things. Okay, do you accept? There's you and a dog. So now we're discussing what you do here. You're the one calling the shots. So any action, broadly speaking, any action we do, it's the motivation for it that determines the character of the action I do. And therefore the karmic results for me. You got my point now? That's the first point. So obviously when you kill your dog or your mother, you're driven by compassion for them, aren't you?
Yeah.
That is absolutely marvelous. This is incredible to do any action out of compassion. But as His Holiness says, compassion isn't, he's implying, it's not just for your benefit. The reason you want to give me a pill is because you don't want me to suffer. You agree? So therefore you better have the wisdom to know the pill you give me will help me as much as possible. Would you agree? That's common sense.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, if you just have only compassion and you give me cyanide, hoping it might help, that would be kind of foolish. Wouldn't you agree? Can you hear the point?
Yeah.
So the same with killing your dog. If the reason you want to kill your dog is to help your dog, you accept that? So you've got to know what it means to help your dog, which means from the Buddhist perspective, having a view of karma, knowing what their mind is doing, knowing when the right time is, and to be certain as well as you can that the action you do of killing your dog will help your dog get a better rebirth. That's the consequence you want for the dog, not just stop its suffering now. But that's well, then you don't have a question.
Well, I do because
So what's your question, darling?
the scenario is that it doesn't matter. There's no guarantee whatever you do. If you die a violent death.
So what's the question, please? Don't give me a statement. It really helps having a question, darling. And look into your mind, not into your notes. What's your question?
If there's no guarantee either way, why is it a negative thing to do euthanasia?
Okay, darling. Okay. We might have to leave it for now because I've answered it all, but you can't hear it, and that's perfectly fine. And I haven't said it well enough, and I'm really sorry. I haven't explained it enough for you. So why don't we leave it for now and have scones and see what happens later, and I can have a private talk with you, because clearly it's an intense thing for you, right? Which is why you can't hear it. Which is why you can't hear it, darling.
I couldn't get my dog pain relief. It had to die. I couldn't get pain relief at that stage. It had to actually be killed. And I had to sign a document saying I'm killing my dog. I don't want to kill my dog. As a Buddhist.
So why are you worried?
Killed, I've done
But
the
why are you
action
no?
first.
So okay, so you're worried mainly about the consequences for yourself. No, you can't. No, it doesn't matter. That's the dog's business. You can't help that because you can't control that.
That's what I'm getting at.
That's
No
what I.
guarantee either way.
There's two things, sweetheart. Okay. There's a result for your dog. Use the simple pill of me with a headache. There's two things happening. There's the karma you create by having compassion for me and wanting to help my pain. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
That's the karma you create. And even if I die from your cyanide, you didn't create much negative karma because you meant well. But if you have wisdom as well as meaning well, you'll not only benefit yourself by having compassion, you'll also benefit me by giving me the right medicine. So if you have the wisdom to know your dog's mind, plus you have compassion, it's a win-win. If you kill your dog or kill your grandmother and they go to the lower realms, that's unfortunate, but you just didn't have much wisdom. But you didn't create too much negative karma. So you're off the hook, darling. It's all right. But don't think like that because it's childish.
But they have their own karma as well, don't they?
That's what I'm saying. You do your best. I mean, surely if you walk into a hospital and you pretend to be a nurse, they'll throw you out because you don't have the wisdom. You got compassion, but no wisdom. Wisdom here is clairvoyance. Really, the best wisdom is clairvoyance, or more wisdom to know how best to help your dog die peacefully. How best, not saying kill them. So the added component is this: we obsess with killing them, and that's mostly because we have an attachment, and our attachment can't stand seeing our mum suffer. It's completely self-centered.
Get that.
And it's completely self-centered. So we think it's compassion, but even that is not very much compassion. It's just get rid of the problem. I mean, we're slaughtering our mums and dads daily now, and even giving the law permission to do it. It's like outrageous, I would suggest, because our attachment only wants nice things. So that's what drives much of our neurosis. You know, we can't stand seeing suffering.
Yes.
That's coming from your attachment, baby. So then look at that part. So have the wish to benefit your mother, the wish to benefit your dog, and do what you can to help them be peaceful, give them painkillers, say mantras, let them hear blessings, bring the Buddhas there. If you have confidence in all that, and you will benefit. So your mother suffers, she cleans up. Every second of suffering is purifying. It's a very different view, darling. You've got to think about it.
Their disease is their karma as well, the way they do
Well,
it.
of course it is, but you've got to have a much more a view of compassion comes in various forms, you know. But we just want to get rid of problems, and we just have panic attacks. As soon as we see a dog suffer, we have a panic attack and want to kill it. We make it sound noble.
I didn't want to kill them.
But hearing my point, darling, I'm trying to answer the bigger question. But why are you so anxious and worried about it? Because you're scared of being punished and going to hell. That's not a good Christian still. No one's punishing you. Well, stop thinking that way. It's childish. Forgive me. I'm being very direct with you.
No.
Please, this is okay. Relax. You meant well. So meaning well is good. Keep meaning well, but get a bit of wisdom now as well on top.
No, I just did an all night, and there's a sister that
Darling, don't talk to me about all this. It's too much. You're being too fundamentalist with yourself. It's ridiculous. Stop it. Come on. Please, we're going to have scones and cream.
I mean, the scones and everything is ready in the.
And it's now what time? 10:30, 9, 10:30, 11. So we have scones and we'll come back and do a bit more.
Do an offering for the like.
Oh, if you want.
They look so good.
Okay, we think of all these delicious scones and the delicious pretend cream. I know, I'm so rude. I mean, she's so kind of giving vegan cream, you know. She said it looks, I mean, I shouldn't have told you, then we could have done a test afterwards and decided who knew it was pretend cream. I'm sorry,
I know.
I'm a dairy freak, you see. I'm completely attached to cream. Forgive me. But kind Amy doing tests of the scones yesterday, and kind Amy whipping the cream and making them all. And Rosetta Rick the cream. All these kind people did the work. And then the creatures, there's no cows involved here, so we can't have compassion for the cows. But there are probably creatures who died for the wheat. So all the creatures who died for the wheat and the lentils that makes the fancy cream. All these creatures, we think we're going to eat these scones and be happy and healthy so we can benefit to sentient beings. That's all. Excuse me. And we have a bit more afterwards. Okay? See you soon. We can't offer you cream. I'm so sorry, you people. You have to go get your own scones and cream. We'll see you in about maybe half an hour. We'll be a bit later than the schedule, but it doesn't matter. We'll have a bit more time. Okay. See you soon, darlings.